Okay. All right, so that's me. We won't bore you with that. Okay. Hold on one second. Let's see if I can unmute. Things are a little sluggish today. So Heather, can you hear me now? Because you have to come in by audio. Let me write her an explanation, and then we'll start. Sorry. Oh, okay. Maybe she just came back in. I hate technical difficulties. Okay. So Heather, can you hear me now? And let me actually look to see if your audio's on. I should be able to tell that. Okay, let me tell her. Okay, I'm going to start. All right, so welcome everyone. Okay, good. It happened. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so it looks like everybody knows how to use the chat box. Again, I'll just throw it up. So on your screen, you're going to see these icons. You want to select the one that looks like a cartoon bubble. You're going to get a box like this, and you want to type here. Okay? All right. Let me shut that off, and let's get started. Okay, first question. How many of you are familiar with VlookUp? Okay. Oh, all right. Well, you will be after this. If you aren't. Second question. How many of you have used it? I know Doug said he was familiar with it. And Vicky. Have you used it? Or just kind of familiar with it? Yes or no? It's good. So VLOOKUP is a really effective tool. And it's actually one of the most common used tools in Excel. When they look at and survey people on what they actually use a lot, among regular Excel users, VLOOKUP's a one that is used a lot. It's probably not like a beginner thing, but it is used by a lot of people. And it's fairly old. It's not like a new feature of Excel. And in fact, there some of the alternatives, which I am going to be actually doing a freebie on the 24th, which is the index match combination, is newer than this. So let's kind of dive in, and I'll give you the basic layout for it and how it works. Okay. So. And it looks like a big, complicated formula. It's actually really not all that complicated. So let me start you just with what it's good and used for. It's very good where you have a large data set, and the data set has to be in columns, okay? And it has to be at least 2 columns. And it can be really helpful if you need to pull information from that. So I've put together this very simple example. I was trying to find an example. This would be for like a transportation department in ordering equipment. Okay? So my lookup table, which is this table here, has items. And basically, they're things you would order, for a bus, and what they cost, and then what's the vendor, which place sells them. Okay? So the first requirement for VLOOKUP is these do not have to be unique. I can have 3 items that are $31 or $5, but in order for VLOOKUP to work, each of the items here must be unique. So if I have 2 bottom brackets, that won't work. And in fact, I just did a lookup involving school teachers, and we had to play around a little bit because we had a couple of teachers with the same names. So we ended up doing, the name of the teacher within parentheses, social studies or something like that, or math, because you must have each one must be unique. Also, whatever you're looking up must be in your most left-hand column of the table. Now, understand, it doesn't have to necessarily be the most left-hand column of the spreadsheet. So I could have had additional, columns to the left of this, to the right of it, actually. I could have had other columns. However, when I select my range, it has to be this, whatever is a lookup has to be the most left-hand column. So, for example, if the data were arranged differently, let's say all these items were here and prices were on the other side. I mean, I could move it around, but let's say it started with prices, will not work. So you always have to be looking up to the right. Some of the other alternatives to VLOOKUP don't have those requirements, but VLOOKUP does. Okay, and so you first need your table. Here I have the table alphabetized in descending order, in other words, going from B to F to P. That's actually not a requirement unless you're doing an approximate. And I'll talk to you in a minute about the difference between an approximate and an exact. If it's exact, it doesn't matter. Okay? All right, so that's my table. And then I have to do my lookup. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk you through the pieces of this so you understand what each part is. Okay? So first you have the lookup value. What is it that I'm looking up? And that would be here. And I just have thrown a drop-down menu here. So you see this simply duplicates what is on the table, clamp, etc. So that's my first parameter, the lookup value. The next parameter is the table array, which means whatever the whole lookup table is. And again, depending on which columns I'm going to select from, I need to certainly include this. I need to have at least 2 columns. Here I have 3. These numbers I put up top on the column numbers, not necessary. I just put that on so you could see when I do this why I'm doing it, okay? And so that's my table array. And then I need my column index. Which column do I want to pull the data from or have represented? So that's why I put these numbers up top. So this is my first column, this is my second column, this is my third column. So if I'm going to do a VLOOKUP where I wanted to pull the price, then that would be my second column, okay? And again, I'll show you what the formula looks like here. So here, the lookup is here, the table array are the things that are in red, and then I'm pulling column 2. I'm saying column 2 on my lookup is what I'm going to select. The next item, I recommend you put it in. It's either true or false. And the default is true, which is approximate. And I will show you an example if we have time where approximate works well. But in most cases, you actually want false, which means it can't just be bottom. It has to be bottom bracket, spelled right. Otherwise, it won't work, okay? And so now watch what happens when I do my VLOOKUP. And again, I just put a drop-down menu. By the way, isn't a bad idea when you're doing VLOOKUP. We were just doing a problem in the district where they have to bill for special ed teachers' hours to a private school, and they have to list all their hours, and every teacher makes a different salary. And we use the drop-down menu because then you don't have to worry about spelling them right. So actually, we just selected this as the range. And so watch what happens. If I select clamp, it's going to give me the price, which is $5. The only reason it's showing up as $5 and not $5 has to do with the format, which I could change to, currency. And then it'll look like $5. Okay, notice here I'm looking up column 2. To pick up the vendor, it's the exact same function, but it's column 3. Okay? And likewise, so that's pretty much all that's involved. If I wanted to do bottom bracket, radiator, clamp, and if you're a person like me who works with VLOOKUP all the time, I remember the formula, the function like the back of my hand because I do it so often. But if not, you look it up. I mean, it's not as long as you know what everything is, it's not really all that hard to figure out, to actually do it. Now, I do want to show you something and how you can fix it. So one of the things that happens with VLOOKUP is if you don't select anything, you're going to get an error message because when it does the form, it does the function, it returns there is nothing on my lookup table. So there's a way that you can get rid of that. You can eliminate that, and I did it down here. Okay. So notice here you're getting the NAs, but down here you're not. Okay, and the way I got rid of it is to take, and it's the same VLOOKUP, and wrap it around what's called an if-NA. So what the if-NA says is, and it's kind of like any other if statement, if it's true, which means there's any amount here, give me whatever the lookup value is. If it's not, give me a blank. And that's over here. So it's pretty much you do the VLOOKUP. For example, if I wanted to change this one, I would do if NA, open parentheses, at the end, comma, 2 quotes, which gives me a blank, and now I have a blank instead of the NAs. Okay? So I'm going to stop. Any questions? Everybody good? Did your head exploding yet? Okay. So I already explained this again. The default is true, but in most cases you want false because you want exact. And it's a little bit more forgiving if you use false, because if you don't, you have to have these in alphabetical order, and you don't have to worry about it if you don't. Okay? So we're just going to look at another use of, it's similar, but another use of VLOOKUP. Okay? So, and this is a very common one. Okay? So maybe we have different union contracts, and every time we have new negotiations, the rates change, or it may also be for other reasons, like, I don't know, whatever. State sets rates for things. So what this represents is the percentage of the employee's salary that they actually contribute for medical, depending on what unit they're in. Now, the examples I gave here were for a town, but I could have had, teachers, principals, etc. Okay? So watch what happens here. So here I have my name of my employees. Here is the weekly salary, and depending on the unit I select, it's going to populate a different rate. Now, this is actually a calculated number. That's just the that's just the weekly salary times the rate. So it's a calculated number, but it's being calculated based on these percents, which are going to change, even though they're reflected as a decimal, depending on which unit they're in. Okay? And again, what I did here to clean it up was to put, and I may even have used a different one here. I use an if error instead of an if NA. By the way, that is another alternative. So if error covers every error, if NA only eliminates an NA error, which looks like that. That's an NA error, that, the #/NA, and this would be any error. So when in doubt, you don't know which one to use, you can always use if error. To be technically correct, it would be better to use the if NA, because with any other kind of error, it also would wipe it out, whereas it wouldn't do it. But it's effective, it works. So either if error or if NA, and I put both of them in the sheet. So again, in the absence of selecting anything, nothing gets populated, okay? And there we go. Pick the units, get the amounts. Now, obviously, these are very small table, but I could have a rather extensive and large table, okay? Again, any questions? I realize you have to play with it a little bit, but I gave you all the formulas in here. It shouldn't be too hard to do. Okay, so let's look at another example. So here is all of my bank accounts. Who can remember bank account numbers, right? So what I did was just to create a little lookup table for the bank accounts. And here I did not do a drop down. I'm just going to make you right. Okay, so notice I have two accounts from Chase. I got to give them different names. So one's the Chase General and the other's the Chase Special. So if I type in Chase General, then it's going to give me that account. Now what I did was, to make sure there was no error, I also had it return the name again. And that's just requesting the first column. Here is just the first column, okay? And instead of giving a blank, because that's another option, in the F error I have not found, okay? So let's try another one. BOA student, that's going to return that, and then I know I'm right. Okay, I'm gonna stop. I notice a couple of people have been trying to come in and out, particularly Heather. Yeah, I don't know, maybe you're having a difficulty on your end today. Any questions? Everybody good? Maybe I'll unmute for a second, see if anybody has anything they want to ask. Anybody have any questions? The line's open, you can ask. I guess not. All right. Okay. So here's a question so you can't go to sleep. Okay? Could I do a VLOOKUP that would take a purchase order number and give me the name of the vendor? Yes or no? If you think yes, put yes. If you think no, put no. I'm not hearing any answer. Let me repeat it again. Could I create a lookup where I could, if I had purchase order numbers, it could return me the vendor? Yes or no? And then if that doesn't work, I'm gonna unmute and find out if you can even hear me. The answer, so. Okay, so that is correct. You can do that. Now here's the question. Could you do a lookup where if you knew the name of the vendor, you could look up the purchase order number? Yes or no? So I'll repeat the question. Could you have a lookup where if you had the vendor name, you could look up the purchase order? Okay, I would say the answer is probably no. Okay, and here's why. Unless you only ever issued one purchase order to that vendor for each vendor, yes, you could. But think about it. Every PO only has one vendor, but a vendor could have 4 different POs. So it's an important lesson. You have to be able to produce something unique, okay? So, and distinctive. So here's a little, and I think there's actually an error in this. I'm going to fix it. Okay, I see it already. It should be returning column 5, not column 4. I'll fix it. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so here we have a little lookup. So what I have here is obvious is a very small list, but here's a list of all my purchase orders, the date they were issued, company, budget code, I made those smaller too, and the amount. So look what happens here. If I select the purchase order, and I did not do the fancy if NA here, I'll just pick one of the first two, 102,767. It's then going to populate GE Capital and the amount. Okay? So I can do that because the POs are in the left-hand column. I'm trying to get data that is to the right of it, and each PO only has one vendor and one amount. Okay? So here's just another, this one's kind of interesting. You can play with it and be creative. So this is a little bit of a two-way lookup. And I did that by duplicating the names on both sides. But I can now take an employee's name and it can look up their phone number. But I also could take a phone number and look up their name. Okay? So how did I pull that off? Because for the first one, the table reference is, the table array is this. For the second one, the table array is this. So I get away with the requirements for the lookup to be on the left-hand side by duplicating the names. Okay? So again, if items are unique, sometimes you can play around with your data in a way that'll kind of solve that problem. Because remember, your lookup has to be in the left-hand column. Okay, everybody good so far? All right. So interesting uses that may not always be obvious. So, and I pretty much, I'm sure I went over this with you, but I talked to you about nested if statements, which is if I want to be able to look up, say, full-time, part-time, and hourly, with one being at part-time, two being full-time, and pretty much everything else being hourly, I could do that through a series of if statements, nested if statements, which are basically saying, if this item here is a 1, and my column is wrong here, I must have copied it wrong, so it should actually be A7. But if my column is a 1, then return me part-time. If not, do another test, another if statement. So these things can get awfully messy if you get beyond about 2 or 3. This can be replaced with this by having a lookup table. So instead of having all these nesting, the same thing is accomplished with a lookup table. With the lookup table being here, 1 for part-time, 2 for full-time, and 3 for hourly. Okay? So almost in every case, when I come in to work with a school district or an organization, and they asked me to look under the hood at some of their spreadsheets. What I'm finding are these really elaborate, and I'll give you an example of this in a minute, really elaborate, crazy if statement, very complicated. And most of the time I can clean it up and fix it up by switching it to a VLOOKUP. So, and I have a perfect example of this here, really complicated one, okay? So I had a school district, actually in the North Country. No, I think this one was Long Island. I had a school district on Long Island, and they had in their contracts longevities. And I have a little longevity table that I built here. But basically the way it works is when you're on the job for 5 years, you get an additional $2,500 a year. And so that would be, so year 1, 2, 3, and 4, you don't get a longevity. Year 5, you get a longevity, and you continue to get that $2,500 until you click to 10 years. And then that becomes $4,750. Pretty good deal, actually. And then that's until 15 years. And then once you hit 18 years, you get $9,000, but it doesn't go up. Okay? That's how it works. So what I'm going to do is show you the formula that they had to do this. Because it took me like 15 minutes to try to figure out what it is. And I have it here. I'll just show it to you. It was this formula. Okay? Which is all kinds of nests. Basically, it's asking is it between 0 and, greater than 0 but less than 5? If not, then is it between 5 and 10? And if not, is it between 8 and 15? It's a really complicated. Look how many ifs there are. By the way, if you ever want to know how many if statements you have in a function, just look at the number of close parentheses. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to do this. And so it's a nightmare, and it's especially a nightmare if we have a change, where we have some sort of a new contract and it changes. Fortunately, these usually don't. Okay, so let me tell you what I replaced this with. That. So all of this gets replaced with that. And this is one of those examples where you don't want false, because you're not looking for an exact result. With true, it'll give you what's called an approximate result. So what happens here is, if it's 0, they always go down until it clicks to the next one. So if you have a 0, you'll get 0. If you have a 1, you'll get 0, etc. Now, I think these years were actually calculated here, but I'm just going to show you how it works, okay, by just changing it on one of them. Actually, this is the wrong one because this isn't the one. It'll work. It's the same way. If it's 0, it's 0. If it's 1, if it's 4, it's 0. If it's 5, it's the 2,500. So that works the same way here, okay? If it's 0, it's 0. If it's 4 or 3, it's 0. If it's 5, it's 2,500. If it's 7, it's 2,500. Once it clicks to 10, it's 4,700. But here, what I'm using is this, as opposed to that. And here, I want true. Because without the true, if it were 4, it would say it's not exact, you get an error. Okay? Any questions on that? I don't want anybody's head exploding on this, but it's actually simpler than it looks. But just remember, if you want an exact result, we'll only give it to you at 5 years, pick false. If you want approximate, where it's going to go to the bottom, pick true. I will tell you one more trick with this. You could not start this table with a 5. You would have to have a 0 in it, because it can never go below the result. So if I had nothing in my table here, and I selected 4, it would either give me an error, or maybe even give me the 2,500. So I had to start with 0. So you have to kind of establish where the floor is on the table, because it always looks below it until you hit the click, which is perfect for this. okay? And that was a lot simpler. And the advantage here is if I make a change here, it'll be automatically reflected in the table. And while theoretically you could do that here too with references, it's awfully messy, okay? So again, I'm going to stop. Did I have your head explode on that one? Okay. It's easier than it looks. All I would say is register it, how should we say, put it in the memory bank as a capability. Don't worry about it at this point. And if you ever do face a situation like this, just say, I heard there's a way to do it, and pull up my spreadsheet, you know, or listen to the recording and you'll get it, or look online, okay? But I wanted you to know that you can do that, okay? All right, so now we're going to look at something a little, this I think is interesting. All right, so one of the problems with VLOOKUP, or limitations to VLOOKUP, that you can work around, okay, is a lot of our data is two-dimensional, meaning that we have two parameters. We have, in this case, this was a town. We have the programs, and we also have the months. And VLOOKUP, traditionally VLOOKUP, can't do this because it could do the months or it could do the program, but it doesn't know how to handle both, okay? So, for example, and in this first example, it won't work, okay? I can do rides and youth, but if I try to change the month, it won't change. It's just going to give me the January result because VLOOKUP by nature only has one parameter. It can only look up one thing. Well, there's a way we can trick it. We can nest our lookup, okay? There's actually two ways of doing it. I'm going to show you both, okay? But you can nest your lookup, and to do this, the first way I call it, it's the cheat way, okay? And the second, you don't have to cheat, okay? So I'll start by kind of explaining what you're doing here, okay? So what you're doing here is you're doing your regular lookup, which is looking up the rides. But understand, the second parameter, the parameter beyond what program, are the months. And the months here are reflected in your lookup as which column you're selecting. So typically, in a regular lookup, you're just saying, give me column 2, give me column 3, give me column 4, give me column 5. So what I'm saying is do a lookup for this. Actually do a lookup for the column number and have that in the VLOOKUP. So if you look at it, you actually have a lookup in the lookup. So we're looking up the rides. This is our table. And then when it comes to the column, which is the third parameter, there's another lookup. And that lookup is referring to the months. Okay? So here's where the cheat part comes in. Because of the way VLOOKUP works, I can't just look it up from here. And what I'm looking for is something that'll, if it says January, return me a 2. If it's February, return me a 3. If it's March, it'll return me a 4. So what I need to do under the cheat method is to create another table. And that table says, it's just another lookup table, so it has to be on the left. The month will be here. Give me the appropriate column number that corresponds to here. Okay? And then put it in the lookup. Now watch what happens when I do this. I'll let you see my table so you can see where I'm getting it from. Okay, so let's say I want to look at youth in the month of February. So now it is going to return me youth in the month of February, with each one of these being a different lookup. This is the horizontal lookup, the row lookup. This is my column lookup. So with a little creativity, you can do a two-dimensional lookup. And if you think about it, most spreadsheets, a lot of spreadsheets are not, if it was a question of prices and things, that's kind of, that would probably not fit this. But if you're doing anything where you're doing budget analysis or even like a salary schedule, you usually have a row and a column. So two-dimensional lookups are really a cool idea. So again, I don't want to overwhelm you here, but anybody have any questions on that? Or do you want me to do it again? Or you want to see anything? And I know I gave you gave you the template, so you can certainly play with it. But I want to make sure that you understand the basic idea. Okay? So now there is a way to work around the cheat. So you don't have to do the cheat. Okay? And the cheat involved creating another table. Okay? The way you do the cheat is with a function called the match function, which is a lookup. But matches only look up an array, either a column or a row. Okay? And so here, what I'm doing, and I'll kind of lay it out for you. Okay? So I'm saying, come to here and look up the month. And then compare it to this array and return me the appropriate number. So I will tell you one trick, because you're doing one column over, make sure that you include this first column in your numbers, that you actually label it at the array, and you would have to create an array that says 1, 2, 3, and 4. You do need that, okay? So you do need this above. If you don't have this, you can't do it, okay? And so what I'm going to do then is look what happens. If I select January, it returns me 2. If it's February, it returns me 3. Pretty much the same thing as the VLOOKUP, but I don't have to create a separate table. And then what does it look like actually inside? So inside you have a VLOOKUP. You still have a nesting, but instead of nesting with another VLOOKUP, you nest with a match. Okay? And the match is the one that gives you the appropriate column number that corresponds. So they work exactly the same. So once again, if I wanted to look at senior meals for March, which is $250, so I could go senior meals for March, and that will give me $250. Okay, I am going to stop. I'm going to probably unmute just in case there's any questions. Anybody have any questions? Your head exploding yet? No? Okay. All right. I thought maybe you ran away screaming. It is interesting, isn't it? Okay. So you want to see a real example of this this is a real example. But you really want to see a really cool example? I think it's a cool example. Okay. So I'll give you a little background before I show it to you so I can explain it. We have enough time for me to give you a look at this. Okay? So I had a business manager that I worked with. She actually asked me to come in and work with her. She was preparing for her contract negotiation with a few of the units, actually, but in particular with the teachers unit, and she wanted to do some good preparation so she could be ready to do some kind of nice analysis on the fly, okay? And after we mandered around for a while, she said, she showed me what is the real driver behind these union contracts, and that was, and some of you may have seen these, the salary schedule, okay? And I'm just going to go over what the salary schedule is like so you understand it if you're not familiar with them. If you worked in a business office, You probably are familiar, but if you don't, you might not. Okay? And you may even know it because in some cases you're going to see this in union contracts too. Okay? So what you have is parameters. You have the number of years the employee worked. And in this particular case, again, once you're 17, you don't get any more money, so I don't really have to go beyond 17. Okay? And then you get a different salary schedule depending on your education level. So this is a bachelor's, this is a bachelor's plus 15 credits, this is a bachelor's plus 30 credits, master's 30, 45, and then a doctorate. Okay? And there is some logic about how much each amount is worth that we don't really have to go into. Here is the salary schedule. So what you wanted to do was to be able to have a lookup where if she picked an employee, say with 4 years and a master's, it would return the appropriate salary. So in this particular case, 4 years with a master's would be $58,721, and had the ability to do that. The reason she wanted to be able to do it was twofold. One, and this is just a little bit of a fancy thing here, not really complicated, is we built in this one below. This was the original schedule, and all of these numbers, because they're reflective of a certain increase, all the numbers get increased correspondingly. You know, what would happen if there was, for example, a 2% increase? Then this would be the salary schedule with a 2% increase. This would be the salary schedule with a 3% increase. And those are easy. That's just every number times 1.03, okay? That she knew how to do, okay? But what she really wanted to do at that point was then be able to immediately do her budget and see what it's really going to cost her. Because salary schedules aside, different employees make different salaries. So she wanted to be able to, like, if we pulled it off a table, be able to immediately know the budgetary impact. Immediately be able to tell any employee who's sitting at the table what the salary impact would be, but also to be able to calculate the whole budget based on the adjustment. So it's a little bit of a complicated mix if you don't have this, okay? So I just want to show you what I did. I said, okay, this is a perfect use of a two-dimensional lookup. And this one I did use the match function. I could have used the cheat, but I didn't, okay? And here's what we have, okay? So what happens here is it looks up, say the employee is Taylor Swift, it looks up, the lookup is the second step, and then the match is returning the column that represents Masters 15. And sure enough, that provides the accurate number, if it's right, if we didn't make a mistake, okay, which I believe it's correct. Okay, it's here. All right? So, and I'll just change it, I can change. So, if this were 3 and a doctorate, that's going to give you, that rate. So you can imagine the benefit of this. First of all you have to do is do one of them and then copy it all the way down. She had an immediate ability to do, okay, I'll make, here's a change that we're doing, because this is based on the 2021 schedule. If I do I'm sitting in the negotiations and we're estimating the impact, I can go to a 4% and I immediately know, if I total this up, how much it's actually going to cost me for salaries for all of the employees. How's that for cool? I mean, maybe I just get excited over this. But, this is, you want to talk about something that saves work once you set it up. And I understand there's a little bit of setup work and debugging, but once you've got it, you got it, and then you can use it moving forward. So I'm going to stop. Any questions on that? And I understand that may be above some folks' pay grade at this point who didn't even know what lookup was. But it really isn't that complicated once you get to it. So I'll stop. Any questions? Okay. So there is another way to do this. And even though I have a little bit of time left, I'm not going to do it with you. You can also accomplish this through a match and index. So instead of using a instead of using a VLOOKUP at all, you can actually use match and index and match, and two matches actually. Because index and matches, it's kind of like you're building a map and you're telling it, okay, where are we, what column are we here, what row are we on, what column are we on. So I'm not just going to leave you with something like this and let you hang, like throwing it out in the wind and then letting you hang. So I'm going to make an offer I think you may not be able to refuse. And that is, on March 24th, I'm actually going to be doing a free session at the same time, 1 o'clock, on how to use index and match as a replacement for VLOOKUP. And I promise that I'll push out an invite for that. I think I may have done it already with your group, but I'm not sure. But I'll make sure that you get, info on how you can sign up for that as well. Or you can just come in, use the same login that you used for this. But it is on March 24th, and it's from 1 to 2. And like I said, depending, for somebody who was kind of digging this and want to look at one other way to do it, that's fine if you don't totally get that. Okay? All right. So I think we're just about done. Any questions? All right. What do you say we call it a day and you can go play? Okay? You have the template. You know how to reach me. I will push out the info about the 24th. And so I guess we'll call it a day. Thank you. Okay? Sorry for any technical difficulties if folks had a problem